It's really, it's a, you know, it's a game.
I told him, he told me she can't do it. And I said, yeah, I keep hearing every day, more and more people that you talk to. So.
We had two.
I believe it was right here.
And then I can advance it with this, or should I just use the laptop?
I say because she's not here. No. Oh, yeah? Yep. Sure could be.
That's not good. Because that is leaving me way out there.
All right, thanks. From Kathy? Okay, yeah. Yeah, I saw she kind of said, let this be, you know, so. All right.
Yeah, Mr. Haynes. Yeah. There's no problem.
You actually met in that building, right? For a few years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure, I met there. Irma, when did we move on to this?
11-ish.
I was there 7 years. Never know.
Linda Johnson, could you please give the invocation?
Let's bow our heads. Father, I thank you that you are the King of Kings, you are the Lord of Lords, and you are in all, you are through all, and you are over all. Father, in this day when there's so much dissension, there's so much anger, so much hatred, so much disunity, Father, we take comfort in the words that said, I would have lost heart unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Psalm 27:13 and 14. Father, our hope and our strength are in you. And as this council calls upon you tonight, you hear them. And no matter how difficult the decisions may be, the answers will flow from your throne. For your word says that when we call upon you, you will show us great and mighty things of which we do not know. Lord, we trust you to lead us, to guide us, to reveal your truths and your plans and your purposes for our city tonight through these that are seated here, those whom you have appointed to steward the gifts that are within them, that you've placed within them, to establish your kingdom and your purpose here. Father, for fear we bring peace and joy. For anger we bring peace, Father. For dissension we bring unity, Father. I ask you for your angelic host to surround this gathering tonight, and everything that is done here will be for the good of this city, Father, for the good of the people that live here, and be according to your kingdom purposes and plans for this city. Father, I say, thy kingdom come, thy will be done here in this earth tonight as it is in heaven. Amen.
Thank you, Linda. So now that it's 6 o'clock, we'll officially call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, could you please take the roll?
Mayor Miller.
Here.
Alderpersons Clem.
Here.
McClanathan.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
Parker.
Here.
Busker.
Here.
Brashaw.
Here.
Keister.
Here.
And Chesney is absent.
Could you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Alderman Busker?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Alderman Busker, the meeting is yours.
All right. First order of business, entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So move.
Second. Moved by Alderman Keister, seconded by Alderman Ross. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Moving on to number 5, approval of the minutes from the Committee of the Whole meeting held on October 9th. Entertain a motion to approve.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Alderman Keister, seconded by Alderman Don Parker. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Moving on, public comment.
There is no public comment at this time.
Actually, I have
Mayor
one.
does have one
that's
to
right.
be read
Yes,
into the record.
If I could read this into the record, it was Frank Butterfield of the Landmark, Illinois, shared the following information with me. Please be aware that you may wish to do another reach out for developers who have shown prior interest in the historic city hall. The 25% state historic tax credit will take effect on January 1st, 2019. It is capped at $3 million per project and $15 million per year for the whole program. However, the city hall would be a competitive project to get that incentive. I am encouraged by this development and hope that you are as well, and that you will see the value in continued pursuit of developers and redevelop the city hall to keep it out of the landfill and to save our city ancestry. Putting this building on the tax rolls will be a greater value to the citizens of Freeport and Northwest Illinois now that the state 25% historic tax credit is a possibility. This building is definitely on the radar for the Landmark, Illinois, and they are available to help you and answer any questions the developer might have. Best regards, Kathy Wilkin.
Any other public comment on agenda items? Seeing none, we will move on to the discussion of levy proposal. Manager Crowe, you want to start?
So the way we'll start here is I'm going to ask Kevin Kavanaugh from Lautenbach Raymond to step up, and he has the presentation in front of you, which he will run through, and then we will present, myself and Director Bucas will present our portion of the levy presentation.
Thank you for having me here today. My name is Kevin Kavanaugh, representative from Lauterbach and Amon. I'm an actuary at the firm. This year, we prepared a few different reports for the city of Freeport. For the police and fire pension funds, we prepare one report for each fund that's primarily for financial statement reporting, and then we prepare a separate report that's more for funding requirements. And so the primary objective of me being here today is to discuss the funding report and go through some of the factors that kind of are the details behind the breakdown of the recommended contributions for this year. If I can get this in full screen. So if you turn to the first page in the presentation in front of you, which is just a mirror of what you're seeing on the big screen there, the bottom line results for this year are the current contribution recommendations for the fire pension fund, $1,890,000. For the police pension fund, $2,210,000. For a combined total contribution of $4,100,000. Most notably, the fire pension fund contribution has increased significantly from the prior year, about a 32% increase from the prior year. On the police pension fund, we saw a decrease of about 3.5%, and I'll get into the factors that led to those changes in a moment. Below, you can see your percent funded on an actuarial value of assets basis for the fire pension fund, sitting at 65.72%. And for the police pension fund, a 48.23%. Compared to the prior year, for the fire pension fund, that's down about 11%. For the police pension fund, down about 2.8%. Your unfunded liabilities are shown there. And for both pension funds, those unfunded liability amounts totaling the $43.9 million are projected to be paid off over a 20-year time period. So part of this year's contribution recommendation is a payment towards that unfunded liability. The other component of the contribution is essentially the normal cost, or the cost of benefit accrual for all your active employees. The general sense there is you're funding for those pension benefits during the active working career of employees, so that when the benefit payments come due, the money's already set aside in the trust. And then shown below there is your active member counts for each fund. Combined 92 active members and 123 inactive. So a slightly leaning towards an inactive member count across both funds. If you turn the page there, that's going to give you a breakdown of the asset performance throughout the fiscal year. And what's important to note, this is for the fiscal year ended April 30, 2018. So when we talk about a beginning net position, that would be from May 1, 2017. Ending net position is as of April 30, 2018. Most notably is that middle line where it says return on investments. $2.6 million for the fire fund, $1.6 million for the police fund, for a combined $4.25 million in investment earnings. It's about a 7.9% annualized return for the fire fund, 7.2% for the police pension fund. Currently, the expected return assumption is set at 6.75% for both funds. And so that's, it's nice to see that asset performance above expectation for this fiscal year. One of the things we do when we develop our recommended contributions is we take a look at the current fund population. We look at upcoming retirement eligibilities and what we expect to see in terms of future benefit payments. And so listed on the top line here on page 3 is your current benefit payments for a combined $5.2 million in current annual benefit payments. And what you're seeing there in the bottom 2 lines is the projection of what we expect to see for benefit payments on a 5-year and a 10-year basis. It's obviously big dollars, but I think based on other funds that we look at, I think what's important to note is actually these increases are less than, I would say, what we see on average. And part of that is due to the fact that the population for both funds is more weighted towards inactive fund members. So that's one thing to note. And turning to the next page, I mentioned I would give a breakdown of how we got from last year's recommended contributions to this year's. So this page is going to show you most of that information, and happy to entertain any questions on this. Essentially, what you're seeing on the top is expected changes, a breakdown of what we would expect the contributions to be this year if nothing changed from the prior year. The next line item is your salary increase greater or less than expected, which had a fairly significant impact on the fire pension fund, a $22,000 increase in this year's recommended contribution. We saw most active fund members getting salary increases right around 4.25%, just a little bit above expectation. Next up is your demographic changes. There's a summary of the demographic changes in detail on the next couple pages, so I'll wait till we get there to talk about that. The next one's an important one, is your assumption changes. And so I want to take a kind of stop here for a second to explain some of these assumption changes. This is the first year Lauterbach and Amen has been hired to do the actuarial reports for the city of Freeport. So when we take over from the prior actuary, we do a comprehensive look at all of the assumptions that are in place for the plans, and we update those to kind of our standard across most of our clients with some guidance and really customized based on each fund, looking at what the actual plan demographics suggest. So one of the things that was had a significant impact in terms of these assumption changes, and you're seeing the big increases there, was mortality improvement. And so what that means is there's mortality tables for every pension fund, is essentially a table dictating what percentage chance there is that a participant will pass away in any given year. What goes along with the mortality table is a mortality projection scale, meaning that we're projecting that in the future, mortality will get better, people will live longer. Every study done by the Society of Actuaries has suggested that continuously people are living longer, so that's just the reality of the situation. When we took over from the prior actuary, he was using a mortality table that was improved generationally, meaning that each year mortality was projected to improve a little bit, but that was stopped at 2015. So when now our new mortality assumption is that mortality is not going to remain fixed in 2015. It's going to continue to improve for the entire future of the existence of the pension fund. And that had the largest impact in terms of an increase in the recommended contribution for this year was that change in assumption. Another notable change in assumption was that expected return assumption was set at 7% prior to our taking over. We've lowered that to 6.75%, which is more in line with the assumptions we see across most police and fire pension funds across the state and capital market projections going forward. So those were the primary drivers of the increase, the $696,000 on the fire pension fund and the $331,000 on the police pension fund, for a combined impact around $1 million. The next one is your funding policy changes. And if you notice, that actually kind of took away from some of those assumption changes because it was a fairly significant reduction for both funds. What that funding policy change is a representative of lowering the funding policy payoff from targeting a full funding for both funds from 2041 down to 2038, and then contributing on a level dollar. We moved to a level percentage basis, which I'm happy to explain further if you have any questions about that. And then below that, you'll see your asset return greater than expected, greater or less than expected for both funds, the impact there, and then contributions. And so the total increase in that recommended contribution for the fire pension fund and the $510,000, and the police pension fund, the $65,000 increase. The next two pages are going to show you a breakdown of those demographic changes. Just in honor of kind of time, I won't go into it too much detail, but if there's further questions on that, I'm happy to explain those. What you're seeing on this slide, the funded percentage summary, is essentially the same summary I just went through, just showing the impact on a percentage funded basis from each change, and how that got us to our current funded percentages. This net pension liability is what's reported on the city's balance sheet for financial statement reporting under GASB 68 standards. And now we recognize that the significant increase in contribution is not something that the city might be prepared or be able to handle in a single year because of such a large percentage increase, especially the 30% on the fire pension fund. So what we've kind of outlined here on the next couple pages is a breakdown of a transition plan. And so the general idea behind a transition plan is that because of the significant increase in contribution due to all the factors that I just mentioned, we've developed a path forward for the city to be able to get to those full recommended contributions without taking such a large increase in a single year. And so what you're seeing for the fire pension fund there is essentially there is a fairly large spike in the first year. And the reason for that is because when these assumption changes and funding policy changes were implemented, it affects the statutory minimum required contribution. And so we're never, as an actuary, we would never recommend contributing less than the statutory minimum contribution. And so that first year, the significant increase is due to those factors and their impact on the statutory minimum number. And so that's why you're seeing the spike in the first year, and then it levels off a little bit more in future years. And we've shown this out through 2040. And the reason you see the big drop off there towards the end, as I mentioned, we are on a funding policy that's targeting 100% funding for both plans in the next 20 years. So the reason you see that big drop off at the end is essentially if everything went according to plan and contributions were made as expected, then the payment towards unfunded liability would go to zero because the plans would be fully funded. And all you would have to pay going forward would be a normal cost, which again is just the cost of benefit accrual for all the active employees in the pension funds. And we've provided a similar breakdown, similar exhibit to that for the police pension fund. And so both plans, what's important to note is these are 4-year transition plans. Meaning that in the next 4 years, the contributions that would be developed as part of this transition plan are less than the full actuarially recommended contributions. And again, that's with the intent of trying to mitigate the significant impact of these assumption changes. But after that, if you notice how the red line is just slightly higher than that green line, basically that's due to the fact that because you're taking a few years to phase in these assumption changes through your funding policy, in the future, you'll have to contribute a little bit more to make up for that kind of funding shortfall over the next couple years. And so that's why you see that red line just a hair above that green line, meaning that following the transition plan, future contributions would be a little bit higher than what the actuarially determined contributions would be in order to still target that full funding over a 20-year time horizon. And so that's essentially the main information I wanted to go through with the board today, and I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Any questions from the floor?
Chair.
Alderman McClanathan.
All right. First of all, thank you for the presentation, and it's always, you're the bearer of good news to all the communities, right, when you go through, but I appreciate you coming on in here and kind of laying out the situation. A few questions in regards to some of the assumptions, and then that'll hopefully help us when we're talking about, what are our options down the road. You indicated that you were going on a 20-year assumption, changing it from 2041 down to 2038. What was the thought process behind that?
Correct. Yeah, good question. In general, when you talk about funding a plan on a level percentage of pay basis, which is the funding method that we're using, the sweet spot, if you will, for paying off unfunded liability is a 15 to 20-year time period. The reason for that is because if you're significantly longer than 20 years in terms of payoff of that unfunded liability, what you'll see is that year over year, the payment towards unfunded liability will actually be less than the interest growth on unfunded liability, meaning that you're contributing towards the unfunded liability, targeting that 100% funding, but yet interest is exceeding that payment. So that unfunded liability still continues to grow out from underneath you. So that was kind of the logic behind moving to the 20-year. And then going forward, when that period gets very short, the contribution can become very volatile because with that unfunded liability, any changes that happen in any given year flow into the unfunded liability amount that is then paid down over a shorter time period every year. And so once that period gets very short, towards usually around a 15 years or less time period, then we typically will look at other funding strategies to manage that contribution volatility. And there's definitely lots of other funding strategies out there. The Lauterbach and Amon's preferred approach is a layered amortization approach, meaning that you continue to pay off unfunded liabilities that are existing from the past, but then you set up new bases for each change in liability to pay that off over a new time period.
Follow-up, Chair. And with that, you had indicated that on your recommended figures here for this year, there's a percentage or portion of it that goes towards unfunded liability. What's the dollar figure of that that's going towards unfunded liability under this proposal?
Just a moment.
The one thing while he's looking for that, I will say that Lautenbacher and Amon this is funding based upon 100%. Which is what the Gadsby 67, 68 standards are. The state standards is 90%. But that when you get all your, having worked with Lautenbacher and Amon before in my previous community, they will give you the 100% because that's what they have to follow under their actuarial rules.
That was one of my follow-ups. Thank you.
In terms of the breakdown of payment towards unfunded liability versus the normal cost payment, for the police pension fund, of the $2.2 million contribution, $1.8 million of that is a payment towards unfunded liability. $383,000 of that is normal cost, or the cost of benefit accrual. On the fire pension side, of the $1.9 million recommended contribution, $1.3 million of that is a payment towards unfunded liability, and $567,000 of that is that normal cost benefit accrual. One of the things that going forward, having this assumption, particularly the assumption for mortality improvement, now we're projecting into the future that mortality will continue to improve forever, essentially. That will help in terms of assumptions being more in line with reality, so that unfunded liability in the future is, hopefully it won't grow as much because the assumption is set closer to what we would expect to see in the future.
What he talked about was this: if we did our fully funded contributions, say we raised the levy here, this is not the tiered, that portion of the tiered, there's a portion that pays off that over that 4 years, so we increase over 4 years.
Correct.
Got a couple more, but Alderman Clem's got some questions here.
No, thank you, very good presentation. Questions I have is basically the initial jump, okay? And you talked about the firefighters coming on, you talked about the longevity, mortality rate, so on and so forth. You know, I've heard from X number of financial guys and X number of actuaries that we were always paying on target, so on and so forth, except for the last couple years where the Gaspy 67, 68 came in. And then I believe we went to the 90%, is that correct? Okay.
Correct.
What I'm looking for is there anything that we really did out of sync to get us where we're at? Or is this a new look at it to the way it ought to be done?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it's a multi-part answer. I think number one, the past, things were different than they are today. For example, having an expected return assumption of 8% 20 years ago might have been perfectly in line with reality. And then as the economy has changed and capital market projections going forward, 8% is just not really a realistic target. So some of those assumptions over time, they may have made sense at the time, but then as you change those assumptions to be more in line with current reality, that leads to increases in unfunded liability. For example, lowering the expected return assumption, that causes you to now discount your liabilities at a lower discount rate, means reflecting higher liabilities. It doesn't necessarily mean it's anything that the city of Freeport did incorrectly or did wrong. But it's just the reality of essentially the way the math works out. And so pretty much all municipalities are moving down expected return assumptions. Across our client base, we see anywhere from 6.5% to 7.25% for funds over the $10 million mark. So being at the 6.75, which is what we've updated that assumption to, puts you in line with what most funds your size are doing. And then in terms of the Department of Insurance, they did a big assumption study in 2017, and pretty much across the board lowered expected return assumptions by 25 basis points. So for a fund, for both of these funds for your size, they're using an expected return assumption actually of 6.5% under the statutory minimum contribution. We still feel that 6.75% is reasonable. So that's part of it. And then going forward, having these assumptions like the generational improvement in mortality is going to help us to, it might mean reflecting a higher liability today, but that means that regardless of what assumption is set, benefit payments are going to come due. And so the closer in line with reality you have that assumption set, the better prepared you're going to be to pay off those future benefit payments.
Okay, thank you.
Chair?
Alderman McClenathan.
So would it be an accurate summary to say that the required contributions of decades past were under too rosy of an assumption to meet the reality of what we're dealing with today?
At least by today's standards.
By today's standards?
Yeah,
Okay.
part of it.
I assume the firm handles a wide variety of firms. Looking at the percentages, 65.72, 48.23, combined 57.37. And obviously that's a large hill, that we're looking to climb over a period of time, assuming the 100% funded rate. Where are we at? I mean, are we compared to average municipalities? And then also part of that, what are you seeing in regards to municipalities' ability and willingness to meet these accelerated timelines? Or are you seeing more often than not, you present the cold hard information and then it's kind of, the municipality has to make the decisions as to how they're going to catch up or not at a given speed?
Yeah. So to the first question, in terms of funded percentage, for fire pension funds, so Lauterbach and Amon, we work with over 350 police and fire pension funds throughout the state. And so on the fire side, we see an average funded percentage right about 55%. On the police pension side, we see average funded percentages about 52%. So that's kind of just based on our experience and our client base, what we see. In terms of recommended contributions, we come in and we're trying to use the most sound actuarial practices, the most sound assumptions, funding policy that we think is going to prepare the plan to be able to be solvent in the future and pay all future benefit payments. The strategy of using the transition plan is essentially the technique that we use to help to ease an impact of a large change on a municipality. understanding the fact that there's tax caps, there's maximum amounts that you can increase the levy each year. And we understand that. At the same time, the math is the math in terms of the demographics of the funds and how those assumptions will impact each fund is a little bit different. As you can see, it's even pretty interesting to see how applying the same assumptions and funding policy on the police pension fund had a significant increase in the contribution, but on the fire fund a reduction. And there was no real difference except for the demographics of each plan.
That reflects the fact that we've had 7 firefighters retire within the last, so he only went through April, where we had 3 firefighters. Now we've had an additional 4 that have retired, and when they're putting this actuarial study together, they have to plan all that out.
Yeah, and it's all based on census data as of April 30, 2018. So anything that's happened since then will be reflected in next year's report. But absolutely, yeah, increased retirements are definitely a factor in those plan demographics.
Any other questions? Seeing none?
Now we're gonna get
Where are we gonna get the money?
That's the hard part.
Yeah. I want to bring up the enterprise zone map. So Director Bigos and I took this information, and we've also been working very closely with the county to determine our EAV, and I'm not sure why this is not coming up. There we go. So one of the things that's happened is we have seen an increase in EAV of a little over 3 million. We went back and forth. That's taxable EAV. Actually, EAV has increased in the city of about 11.5 million, but the majority of that sits within the TIF districts and the enterprise zone. And the actual taxable EAV has increased 3 million, which results in an increase in our, if we kept our same tax rate today, of about $23 million. Or 23,000, excuse me, sorry about that.
I like that first one.
Yeah, we like that first one. So, okay. So issues, change in assumptions increased. We talked about this, and flat to decreasing personal property replacement tax. We are actually seeing the state has again recommended to us, has stated that our personal property replacement tax is going to decrease. Why that's important to us is that is going primarily to fire and police pensions, with the exception of $40,000, which is going to the library. This year, depending on what our recommendation is, the library will probably not see any of that money. Increase in minimum funding as briefed. Ultimately, we have more money going out than we do into the funds. The good news is we've seen record growth in the funds due to the stock market over the last year, but again, it's record growth. So we increased pressure on corporate funds. We've done an increase in police manning, and we have more demand to the road work, as you know. So that, when we look at the funding, we have a couple ways to fund this. One is increased taxes. One is decreasing, what our draws on our corporate general fund is. And as you know, we decreased our general fund a little under $1 million last year to take with some manning and other things. We're going to give you a brief later on tonight that we recommend another $209,000 in decrease. All right. So what happened was the pension boards took this recommendation, and for first time in a while, they have made a recommendation to us as to how they want to be fully funded as we are going forward. So we wanted to know what the impact of this is that the levy from the previous year, we show you the fire pension increases well over $1 million, and the police pension increases as well to just about 800,000. This would result in an overall increase of about $279 per $100,000 per home. We as a staff do not think that this is an acceptable amount. Honestly, this will be hard to swallow from as a homeowner here to see my taxes go up this. I'm sure that the council's of the same opinion. So the other thing that we looked at was, all right, well, let's say we have to go to option 2 if we only have to go to a 90% contribution. As you see, it's a significant decrease down to $129 per household, 31% increases in taxes. Again, this is a large increase as we go forward in taxes. We are not recommending this, but that would drive us towards what the state requirement is for pension, but not meet our Gatsby requirements. This was at the 4-year increase. Oops. All right, 4-year. Did I go option? No, I'll go back one. Option 3. Yeah, option 3. Well, what am I doing here? There we go. Option 3. All right. So option 3. Again, sorry about this. It's the old adage, you got to be 10% smarter than the equipment you're trying to operate, right? So, well, all right. It's a little bit better. Kurt, I may have to get you over here. So get the IT guy in here. So what she never give the boss the opportunity to do the slideshow. So what we've looked at is this is what the actuarial. It's still a 24.4% increase as we go forward. Thank you. See, let's get the IT guy here. 24.4%. This does address. The key with this is if we go this route, we're going to have to stay this route for 4 years, and that will meet our requirements for 100% funding as we go forward. So this will get us to pay back, to get us fully funded, as we talked about, by 2038. It will reach our liability and remove that liability from our books, but it is a significant, it's a 24% increase. It would require a truth and taxation hearing as we go forward. I jumped it. Okay. How come I'm not? Jumping over 2 slides here. Option 4. There we go. Man, having problems. So this is one of our recommendations, is a 4.995% levy. This keeps us under increase. This keeps us under the truth and taxation hearing. It does not, the issue here going forward with this is it does not reduce our overall liability, but it will get us closer to what it will increase what our contribution is. The idea is that we're going to have to keep going forward, increasing our levy as we go forward. Now, the next committee of the whole, there are some proposals out there which I will be showing you, which I won't discuss here, about how we can fully fund our liability. Those are, this does not fund our liability. It's a 3.9% increase in taxes to it's about a $16 increase to a $100,000 home, $200,032. So they would see some increase on this. But this does get us, at least this kind of holds us treading water where we're at as we go forward. Jumps right over that slide. All right, option 5 is a 0% increase. we don't recommend this because we're just going to get further and further in debt as we go forward. However, this is a policy decision, but I wanted to present all of the options to you as we've looked at. So, facts we need to think about when we're dealing with it. The 5% and the 5% and the 0% will not meet pension liabilities. Liability will continue to grow, and there are no truth in taxation hearing. They require all personal property replacement tax, and the remainder of the property tax will be going to the remainder of the personal property tax will be going to the pensions. So, what we're recommending is option 3 or 4. 3 will begin to reduce our liability. 4, as I said, will hold us about even. Okay. So, with that, one thing I did want to show you, here's the facts on the, I had it as, on the 4-year, it's facts, it's long-term commitment. It's 20 years if we do option 3, initial savings over the recommended contribution over the early years. It's a constant, we have to keep constant increasing. There is a truth in tax, anything over 5%, we have to have a truth in taxation hearing. For that, we have to have a 10-day notice out for anybody, and this will buy out our liability. The interesting thing is, if we don't fully fund the pensions, the recommendation is we do get a sign off from the pension boards as we go forward. Questions?
Chair?
Alderman Clanathan?
The operations and assumptions on here are assuming we're only funding pensions through our property taxes.
That's correct. Well, no, personal property.
And personal, a little bit of personal property.
Right.
Yeah. What are our funding? Are there any statutory restrictions in regarding the source of funding for pensions?
No.
So at the
Well, we cannot use water and sewer to fund pensions.
But basically general funds it's just a question of if we're using general funds, obviously it's what are we not funding on the general fund.
That's correct.
Chair, may I continue?
Alderman Clanathan?
A couple of years ago, Winnebago County was #1 per capita in property taxes, and Stevenson County was #2 per capita in property taxes. Do you know, are those numbers still pretty close in the ballpark?
They are pretty close to the ballpark.
Okay. So again, realistically here, well, from a policy perspective, if we're not saying we can put in another, what, 1.7 million on property taxes, which I think you also said, you don't recommend it, it's not feasible, it's not sustainable, we'd have probably made the best funded pensions, the highest property taxes in the state, and some of the worst funded roads in that situation, if we're looking at that. So if you're looking at realistically, what can we do? For us making our decision on this, we have to balance this, what's our appetite for what do we want to have be borne on the property taxes versus what do we have borne on the general fund, or on the general fund, assuming we take seriously the pension shortfalls, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Anyone else want to step in for now?
Mr. Chair,
Alderman Keister?
just a quick question. As Alderman McClanathan alluded to, other options to get it, is there other taxing options or other areas that we could look for the money other than property taxes?
Well,
Without robbing the general fund and have to cut our manpower down more?
you can use any tax increase going forward. Some communities have looked at, I talked to Rochelle this morning, they are actually taking a 0.25% sales tax and applying it to the pensions. However, there has been, if you haven't seen the articles in the newspaper here, Target is in the process of closing all of its stores in the greater Chicago area. because their sales tax and the impacts of sales tax and property tax. And they said that, so they have announced that all the suburbs, it's 2 stores, right,
2 stores on the south side of Chicago.
are closing. So the companies are looking at the sales tax and the impact of their sales going forward.
Follow up, Mr. Chair. Can we look at can we get something in writing as proposals as what some of these other tax increases and stuff might look like if we use those to shore up the pension?
Well, I can give you what the other proposals will look, but we have to, as we go forward, we have to, what I need to know from council is guidance from council, because we have to file our levy by the end of December, by the 3rd week in December as we go forward. So we're trying to get a guidance whether you want us to hold where we're at, increase it slightly, and then look at how to fund it in other ways. So that's basically the decision because of the requirements in dealing with property tax.
Mr. Chair,
Alderman McClanahan.
one of the items on the agenda for later tonight is some restructuring.
That's
and
correct.
Things of that nature. What are the proposed savings under that restructuring plan?
209,000.
Okay.
And so I just negotiated the new insurance for the city, which we'll be presenting next week. We have a $31,000 savings on that as well.
And looking further, I'm not asking you to give us a May budget in November here, but looking at what are the pressures on our general budget from this year to next year. You indicated there's a slight savings on insurance. There's proposed $209,000 in savings on insurance. Are we seeing? I'm sorry, on restructuring. Are we seeing significant upward pressures elsewhere in the budget that you're anticipating going forward, that we should be factoring into this if we're looking at this situation of property taxes versus general fund moving forward?
Well, I think we have to look at the streets, in our street program as one of the major factors that we're trying to divert more money to because they're in such poor shape. Unfortunately, with the water and sewer, we have the capital improvement fund to do some work there, but probably street programs, your biggest one, and then personnel costs are second.
So all of the unions have we'll be going into negotiations. The fire and police union, ASME has just over a 2% increase next year as we go forward. So,
Chair. And I agree in regards to the roads, absolutely. I think also we're looking at what are some of the ways that we can address that as well. And frankly, like that in itself is a separate discussion as to how are we going to fund that. So I agree long term. What are some of our hot points is how do we start addressing this road issue too. I mean, I guess to put my cards on the table, where I'm at in regards to this is there aren't. I know we're putting a lot on you guys in regards to saying if we say hey, we're looking at general fund. On the other hand, I have a very hard time. We're looking where we're at, and I realize the city is 9.2%. I just looked at the numbers this afternoon. We're 9.2% of your property tax bill. 60% school, 10.7 is county, and then the rest are made up of other entities. But given that high property tax, my inclination, a strong inclination, is to be looking at we're going to be seeing some certain savings elsewhere. We maybe don't take that corporate amount of the property tax, and we put the entire property tax as well as property replacement tax towards pensions. See where we're looking at on the general and how it fits on that. Now, I know we don't have final numbers for that tonight, but given our property tax situation, that's strongly where I'm coming from at this point. I realize that's going to make some tough decisions because this is just year one. What happens next year, year 2, year 3, and 4? We can't in our current situation keep coming back to the general fund for it But on the other hand, to say we're gonna do it through property taxes when we already have a per capita, I mean, we're not sitting at 50% per capita here on property taxes. We're already in the top figures statewide, so that's just where I'm coming from.
Just, if we go, so we have 146,000, is that, Randy, that's correction, though it's went into the general fund out of property tax last year, we would pull that out of that. We have $40,000 out of personal property replacement tax that goes into that's going to the library. So the library will probably come back for a request, just for everybody's, an increase in property tax to make up for the loss in 40,000 to council. So and I mean, they have a new director that just reported today, so we get to break the news to her. But because I know that they made reductions as well into their budget last year. So that gives us, and then we have 23,000 additional taxes. That'll make up about 200, between all of those, we'll have about 210,000 to apply towards that.
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Keister.
Alderman McClanathan, you made some good points, and I agree with just about everything you said. But the fact of the matter is, we've held the line on property taxes for many years. We've taken out of the general fund. We have decreased services or decreased manpower to pay for it and stuff. How long can we keep doing that before we don't have enough people to do it? Now, I'm not saying we have to go that way or don't have to go that way, but I think it's something we have to keep in mind as well. Sooner or later, whether we like it or not, however we decide to do it, whether it was sales tax or property tax or some other creative tax, I feel to do this, we're going to have to look at a funding source somewhere. Doesn't have to be property tax. There's other things we can look at. But I just am very concerned with the fact that if we keep going down the path that we have the past few years, when are we going to get to the point where we're not going to have enough manpower to do the jobs we expect them to do? Because right now, if we want cuts, that's the only place we can go. There isn't too many other cuts to make. And I'm not saying we have to go that way. I'm just expressing my opinion that sooner or later, we're either going to have to decide that we're not providing as much service as we have, or we're going to start looking for other funding sources. Because I think we're reaching the point where we're going to have to make that decision pretty soon. Just something to keep in mind.
Chair.
Alderman McClanahan.
Look, there aren't easy answers on the pension long term.
I agree.
And so I'm with you on that. But in some cases, and I'm not advocating we ignore the actuary issues. I mean, you can argue as to whether we should be looking at 90% or 100%, you know, and whether we do 2038 or 2041. That's fine. But the general issue on it is not going to go away. My point for now is, I mean, for all intents and purposes, until our EAV continues to bounce back, and it has started to bounce back, but until our EAV continues to bounce back, we're practically tapped out at the property tax level unless we want to cause significant additional harm to it. I mean, many of you have come into the community over the past, a couple of years, and I think you can attest, everyone can attest to the sticker shock on the property tax when we see it. So I agree on the problem. I agree it's not going to go away. And frankly, let's say this year we leave property taxes as they are in regards to the rates, and we come to a comfortable level of funding at the general fund. I make no bones about it. We're going to be sitting here next year saying, okay, well, that was year one. What are we going to do in regards to year two? So I'm with you on the math and the issues, but I don't see tapping our property taxes further this year as this year's solution.
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Keister.
And I agree with you on that. What I'm trying to say is, we're under a time crunch right now. We've got a few weeks to decide this and get ready for whatever we're going to do, as Manager Crow said. What I'm saying is, this is going to come back and haunt us again next year. Let's not wait until November to talk about this. let's start looking at other funding sources and other means to do this in January, and start trying to make some decisions prior to that and look at all our options before we make a decision.
One of the reasons you're getting this now is the actuarial reports came in as part of the audit. And that showed a significant change in our funding level for fire, which significantly, so I couldn't have even calculated this out before October.
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Keister.
And don't get me wrong, Manager Crowe, I'm not trying to point fingers or accuse anybody. But the thing is, we're under the gun right now. We've got to make a decision right away. I agree with Alderman McClanathan on his decision with the property tax. But we also know that this is going to come back next year and haunt us. So January 1st, or the first meeting in January, is when we should start discussing this and start looking at some of the other options for financing and stuff, so we don't have to hit the property taxes and be able to fund this in a proper manner. That's all I'm really asking right now. I know we have to do it. I agree with what you're saying, but let's do due diligence and let's start this right away, first of the year, and be prepared for the end of the year next year instead of waiting.
Chair.
Alderman McClanathan.
Manager Crowe, if we leave the rate as it is in regards to that and some of the other assumptions that we've already talked about tonight, would you anticipate, and say we're looking at other sources for increasing it, would you anticipate you'd come back to us and say, okay, well, here are the funding recommendations for these certain levels, and here's the shortfall that we have. What do you want us to do in the budget, or how do you see that playing out? Because I don't want to ignore the pension amount. I'm just quibbling over the source for this year.
So as we go forward, we've already begun discussion at the staff level about the impacts to this, because we had gotten these figures, and with the brief you're going to see, we will have made personnel cuts in every department but one within the staff.
Under what assumption out here? Under which option?
Well, we don't list that. So if we go, what I'm saying here is if we're going to have to generate additional money with zero funding, and we need to fund these to a certain level, we're going to have to come up with additional money as we go forward. I cannot, as we go forward here, the budget takes us to really look at a real good look at what the budget is and how we're going to fund this and what the impact is. It's going to take us 3 to 4 months to take a good deep dive on those budgets. So when you say we're going to start looking at this in January, we're starting our budget discussions right now and looking at how, what I can tell you is with the zero financing, we're going to have to, we already know that that's why we talked about with assumptions option, the fifth option, we know we're going to, both the fifth and the fourth option, we were directing all of the property taxes and the fire and police pensions and all of the personal property replacement tax into those options. That's why I said we would keep even with that 5%, because that was, we're counting in the additional 23,000 that we would have, plus the 149,000, plus the personal property replacement tax of additional 40,000. So that gives you an additional, as I said, about 210,000 plus the additional money. The zero option, we're going to have to really go back to the drawing board if we want to be funding the pensions at the level where we need to bring it back to meet what the actuarial request is, because that's a significant impact to us.
And Chair,
Alderman McClanathan.
under no scenario, outside of jacking our property taxes up 70%, do you realistically see us meeting that?
No, I'm talking about the 4-tier,
Okay.
the 4-year tier system.
Okay.
That's what I'm talking about. Not option 1 and 2. We're not even I presented those strictly because that's what the pension boards have asked us to present to you.
So you're looking at about an $800,000 increase, is when you're talking about these numbers, not the 1.7.
All right.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Alderperson Brescia.
thank you. Manager Crow, from what I'm looking at with the choice of either option 3 or 4, and even with the best case scenarios, with the cost savings, with the reorganization, and with the other savings you mentioned, we're still looking at a shortfall of about $600,000 for option 4 that we'd have to come up with a
It's
way
not,
to increase
it,
revenue.
it's, with option 4, our tax revenue, so we would get personal, so we're talking about the 800,000, so we have 200, let's go back to that slide.
220.
So, so what this does is our proposed tax levy goes up so it goes up 64,000, well actually 50,000 over what we currently have. And then fire for police, it goes up 8,000, so that's about 100,000 here. We increase, so we have 145,000 for corporate tax which also would go towards that. And then I'm doing math in my head, public math in my head, which is not good. And then the personal property replacement tax is an additional 40,000. We would be about I think about 400,000, 400 to 500,000 short what we're going to present. So we got an additional savings that we're going to present to you tonight, which is a proposal to save an additional 209,000. So we're about 300,000 short.
Chair,
Alderperson Brescia.
thank you. Pardon my voice. So we are looking at a shortfall about half of what I was estimating, and we still must decide on an increase in revenue if we go with Plan 4.
Right.
Approximately 300,000, but that's only for this coming year. The year after, we're going to still have another intervention and have to do this all over again, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So this is the 0% option. You know, you're seeing the division of about the additional 23,000 plus 145,000 plus 40,000. So over the 800,000. So the 0 option leaves us 650,000 short, plus what we're going to present to you tonight, which is an additional 209,000. So we'll be about 400. I'd say about 450,000 that we need to come up with out of this one for a 0% option. Again, public math. So
So we're looking at the options that, could you show the number 3 option slide up there and what the difference is there?
So this is paying down over a 4-year period. So what you're looking at with option actuary 4, you're seeing this constant increase over 4 years. And it's $98 per $100,000 in increase. It's a 24.4% increase. This is a significant increase.
Mr. Chair.
One second. Okay, go ahead.
Now, if I'm correct, you're saying that 24%, that would be increased every year tacked on there, or that would be the first year?
No, there would be, with option 3, there's a significant, what is the, Randy, you got there, the chart.
Right. The first year, we're looking at about $500,000 for the, actually a savings. Well, let me look. The way the 4-year transition is set up, each year after the 4th year, we'll see an increase of about $100,000 for approximately 10 years, and then you'll start seeing an increase until we reach a $172,000 increase in year 2039. So we're actually going to be paying over this next 20-year period $1 million more. This I'm just talking about the police pension fund, more than we would have if we would have kept to the recommended amount.
So to go to the tiered, so the 2019 contribution year would be, correct me if I'm wrong, it's $935,000 for fire pension and police pension would be will be $1,393,000. That increases under the 4-year transition. We would have to for fire police pension, we would have to go up $400,000 next year and $300,000 the following year, and again $300,000 the next year, and then we would balance out, but we would continue to need to get that $100,000 increase based upon actuarial assumptions. And the fire pension goes up almost transition goes, like I said, $935,000 goes up $400,000, and then it goes up $200,000, and then back to $400,000, and then $300,000, and then it goes up about $100,000 a year, if I'm reading this right. Yeah. Sure. If I'm, again, I'll bring the actuary up.
Yeah, absolutely. One quick comment on the transition plan that you have in front of you. When you're looking at those projected contributions, for example, when we talk about a budget year of 2020, we would assume that those amounts would be the amounts that were generated from the tax levy happening in 2018. And so that under the firefighters pension fund, when you see the 2020 4-year transition number at $1,485,000, that would be assuming that would be this year's, like the 2018 tax levy would be $1,485,000. And then similarly for the police pension fund, the $1,713,000 expected in fiscal 2020 would be representative of a $1.7 million tax levy in 2018. The one reason, so essentially the way we've developed it is for the police pension fund, we're trying to get annual increases at about $320,000 each year during that 4-year transitional period. On the fire pension fund, it's about a $355,000 annual increase in contribution. The reason for, on the fire side, the reason for the more significant increase in the 2020 budget year is due to the statutory minimum issues with those changes in assumption reflected in the new statutory minimum numbers being $1,485,000. So just to avoid issues with not meeting a statutory minimum requirement, if that helps.
I guess, I'm just trying to look at the worst case scenario here. If we, on the option 3 at $98, kind of looking at the homeowner's perspective here, is that going to stay at that price for the next 4 years during that tier, or how much is that going to go up if we're doing this plan versus any, just as a basis? Where is that gonna?
It'll go, I figure probably your taxes will go up anywhere from 50, this year will be 98, could be, I'm looking at this, it could be in that same range, 60 to 90 every year for the next 4 years.
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Keister.
And I hate to keep bringing up the same thing, but I know we've discussed this a number of times in the past, and there was talk before about different tax levies that we could do, I believe, and Alderman Clem, if you remember any of these, please help me out. There was a gas tax, cell phone tax, and several other taxes that might possibly be available for us out there to increase. Are there something we can look at to help offset some of these?
One of the things the council needs to remember and consider about this, the chances of these additional levies that you're talking about, the additional taxes, we stand a very good chance of losing home rule and all those go away.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Clem.
I've listened to a lot of real good conversation here tonight, and I think X number of years of keeping a zero tax levy and X number of years of cutting back to where we're at nothing has got us just about where we're at. So I think at some point in time, we need to take a look at some form of option, and I don't believe, Mike, those other options are out there. I'm not saying we have to substantially raise this in the first year, but we really need to seriously take a look at if we can blend something into this and start out. One thing for the public to remember is we didn't create these pensions. These pensions are a state thing that we're mandated to pay, end of conversation, and we're going to pay them till the end of time on everybody that's retiring. So this is, no matter, when you hear of other states, other communities that are in big trouble, this is one of the primary reasons of it. But I think we need to face up somehow that we need to do something along the line here. And I believe, the best thing we've had so far is some real good conversation here as to where and what we can do, and maybe we can take a look at one of these blends going forward. I'd more or less like to see, like was discussed, some of the numbers in the cuts that you had talked about, because if we're going to keep providing services, we're going to need having people. One of the emails Lowell and I got at the start of this thing was what a wonderful job we were doing on leaf pickup. Well, let's cut a couple more people out and see how that leaf pickup works. We got to take some common sense into this. We can't eliminate people and eliminate services and keep people happy just because their tax is the same. So all I'm saying is I believe we've had some good conversation. I think we need to move it forward to the council so we can take a look at it more and see what we can all get together and do. Believe me, I don't want my taxes to go up. The one thing, any more than anybody else does, the one thing, and I know this, Peter, we've always talked about, Winnebago and Stevenson being number one and number two in taxes, Let me ask a question, and this is just out of curiosity. You hear so much about taxes around the collar counties and all of that. I mean, of real upheavals of what people are paying and everything else. Is that due to the excess valuation primarily, that there's so much more, dollars and cents wise?
Well, I'm going to be in the assumption that I'm going to alienate some of the other taxing bodies. And Randy and I both came from other communities where the Park District only had 2% taxes or 3% taxes, and the school district only had 50% taxes. They accounted, so what was happening was the communities, my community I came from prior to here was about, the cities was about 23% of the tax in the fund. So
And we're at 10.
we're at 10. But that was based upon, because there was a reduction in the tax, the amount that the school district and the amount of the park district were taxing. So, you know, we're a smaller percentage. I'm used to the city being the second largest taxing district. And unfortunately, we are not. We're third, almost the fourth largest taxing district.
Chair.
Alderman McClanahan.
And it's a couple things. I mean, if you have the average home price is $300,000 in your community, and the average price is, you know, less than $100,000 here, when you have, when you talking about Rockford and Stevenson County, or Winnebago and Stevenson County, when our EAVs got hammered, it just puts such an increased burden on those of us who are still here. So that's why, yeah, someone might pay $12,000 in property taxes in a Collar County, but their percentage wise, their tax rate is below what our tax rate is here, because, you know, higher valued homes. You're absolutely right also, Manager Crow, in regards to the overall tax burden, in regards to that, having us at 9.2% is an outlier in regards to it. Having the Park District more than us is an outlier towards other districts. Problem is, when taxes get raised by any entity, whether it's the school board, Highland, Freeport, Park District, what do they say? Well, why are our city taxes going up?
I agree.
On it. So, yeah, we've been trying to be fiscally responsible in regards to this, and you don't get the credit for it, but you get the blame for other actions. However, at the end of the day, regardless of what the percentage is, per capita, they are so high. Now, and also that there's a third point I want to make as we go forward on this. We're operating and we're accepting, we've never accepted the assumption of 100% funding ratio before. Gatsby changed it. We've never operated under that. We need to decide, do we want to be a community that says we have to hit 100% within X amount of years, or are we going to be comfortable with a slight less target of that's fiscally responsible, but also not causing us to say, oh my goodness, we need to do 1.7 million of an increase in 1 year. I think there's some middle ground there. But I agree, at the end of the day, for us, it's just a question of, I mean, are we comfortable telling the citizens, yeah, the city's going to increase your property taxes more at this time? I don't think anybody's happy with their current property taxes. I don't think anybody's, you know, even if we keep it at zero, it's not going to make people magically happy in regards to it. But, you know, if we were at like the 50% threshold instead of like the 100% threshold on it, maybe there's some room to grow here. So we do need to move it forward to the next council meeting. I don't think we're going to have a consensus as to what out of the 5 options we recommend tonight. But again, as we move forward on it, I think the question for us is, are we comfortable with increasing what our property tax rate is right now from the city, or are we going? Well, there's twofold question. One, what level do we want to fund our pensions going forward in regards to this? What level are we comfortable for that? And then 2, how much of that do we want to place on the property taxes? Once we answer those 2 questions, it all falls into place.
Any other questions on this topic? Or any discussion at all on it?
Do we need to move the topic forward to the council meeting formally in a motion? You're going to want a recommendation, aren't you?
No, I am, you know, right now, I don't feel comfortable in taking this to the council meeting on the 19th, because I'm not sure. We have clear direction from and this is not, but I know I have to have a council, I have to have a levy approved by the 3rd Tuesday in December.
Okay.
So, I mean, we can go back and do some additional work and bring it back up to on the first meeting in December.
Could I recommend this, and then maybe council say this, you can recommend multiple options to be put on the agenda.
Attorney Zito.
Well, I will add that, you know, as a part of the process to approve our tax levy, there is the requirement that at least 20 days prior to the final adoption. So if we're going to assume that the final adoption takes place on the 2nd meeting in December, because we have to have it filed by that following Friday, if we back out 20 days, what we have to do is 20 days prior to the final adoption is we have to have presented an estimated tax levy that the board